Okay, so we are very excited to have two excellent speakers with us tonight to discuss democracy and diversity. I will give a brief introduction of both speakers first, and then I'll hand the floor over to our first panel speaker. And so our first speaker tonight is Councillor Hina Bokhari, who is a Liberal Democrat and the first Muslim woman to be elected as a councillor in Merton. She was also elected to the London Assembly in May this year as one of the first Muslim women. And Hina is a longtime supporter of proportional representation, has campaigned actively with Make Votes Matter and other organizations, and is now an MBM Alliance partner. We also have the pleasure of welcoming Lord Paul Tyler, who is the Liberal Democrat Spokesperson for Constitutional and Political Reform in the House of Lords. And he's been actively involved with the campaign for electoral reform for many years. Among many other initiatives, Paul introduced a Constitutional Renewal Bill in the House of Lords in 2009 and has contributed extensively to media coverage of electoral reform. So I'm hoping I'll be able to hand over to Hina now. Yes, I think online. That's perfect. I have given a little bit of an introduction. I hope you heard some of that. And I would like to hand over to you to talk a little bit about yourself, your involvement with the campaign for PR, and what we can all do to make different communities feel welcome in the campaign. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry I've come a little bit late and now using my phone, but that's what technology is sometimes. But really grateful for the time today that you've given me to speak about this. It's something I'm really passionate about. So first of all, just to introduce myself, I'm a mother of two. My mum and dad are from Pakistan, and I was born here in Enfield. My brother and I, grew up as Londoners. I've always been Londoners, and most of our careers and our life has been here in London. But my father was probably the most inspirational person for me. He was a teacher. He actually graduated and started university at the age of 16. So he was a bit of a prodigy even at that age. Started lecturing in the university that he went to at 18 and then came to this country hoping for a wonderful new life. He actually started working in a textile industry, kept on getting refused promotion after promotion. So he decided to go back into teaching. And he was very successful. He became the very first Muslim head teacher in Britain. The school that he became a head teacher was in Tooting in London, in a school called Ernest Bevan. And it just so happened that the first pupils to see my dad walk in as the head teacher, one of the first pupils to see him was Sadiq Khan, who then also became the very first Muslim mayor for London. So there's some quite historical moments in our family, and it inspired us to do something different. When my father did pass away, we realised just how much he'd contributed to society. And we wanted to do something for him. And in his memory, we set up a charity called the Naz Legacy Foundation. My father was called Naz Bokhari. The Naz Legacy Foundation was set up because after many years of teaching, and myself, I also followed in his footsteps and been teaching for about 20 years. We'd seen a real disillusionment amongst young people, particularly from ethnic minorities, from diverse groups, from groups of where children were finding things challenging. And we wanted to make them feel inspired to contribute back to society. My father loved being British and living here, and felt that he wanted to give back to this country, and that's what we instill in the children that we mentor now. We do diversity projects with them, trying to inspire them to feel integrated, feel the value that they can bring back to this country. We then had an additional charity called the Patchwork Foundation. The Patchwork Foundation is a charity that reaches out to ethnic minorities and people from diverse communities who, again, are disillusioned, but want to contribute by getting involved with politics. And it's really hard for somebody from the ethnic minority background to get involved with politics. It's basically who you know sometimes to get into politics. So Patchwork Foundation and the NAS Legacy Foundation are two charities that our family started off. And I actually just carried on teaching while all this was going on, because that was my passion. I really wanted to make sure that I was giving back to my community in a way that made some real direct changes to people's lives. And it was wonderful. I loved being a teacher. And I did it for 20 years in some of the most deprived areas of London. However, when my son was born, he had real challenges with speech and language, and he found it very difficult. It was really challenging time for all of us. And I realized just how bad the funding situation was in schools. As a teacher, I knew it was bad, but when it's your own child, then it really hits you. And I decided that I needed to do more. So I started campaigning for a group called Fair Funding for All Schools, which was parent-led. I joined the Liberal Democrats because they had the best education policies, in my opinion. And I started campaigning. I realised that I needed to get a voice, and I needed to represent the voices that were not being heard. Literally from my son's perspective and the children that I wanted to represent, but also from parents and schools and teachers and people in the education services who are really struggling to get their voices heard. I worked my socks off, and I managed to beat the Conservative councillors who had been there for about 18 years in a ward that had never been represented by someone like me. I became the very first ethnic minority councillor elected in the ward, and I was shocked to find out that I was the very first Muslim woman elected in Merton, the whole of the borough. And to this day, that I'm proud, but also disappointed that it took such a long time for someone like me to get elected in such a diverse part of London. When I then took my next steps towards becoming a London Assembly member, I realised again that I would be if nobody had ever, from my background, nobody like me had been elected, there'd never been a Muslim woman elected in the GLA, again, breaking another barrier. And I was really proud to be one of the first Muslim women to be elected in the GLA. So yes, very proud, but not necessarily pleased, because I think we can do so much better. I'm proud that the fact that, I've always been very passionate about politics and making sure that we're reaching out to diverse communities and being inclusive and getting involved with politics. I realized that actually that was more challenging than it should be, which is a real shame. When it comes to diversity, we need to be in politics for the reason I got involved with, which was to represent voices that aren't being heard. And diversity is integral to that. Diversity is about being able to reach out to all different groups, whether it's gender, age, ethnicity, religion, disability, sexual orientation. We need to be able to reach out to all of those groups and represent them. But we also need to make them feel included. And inclusion is vital for any organisation or political party or any politician, to make sure that everybody feels that they're being heard and valued, and not to feel as if they're feeling other. Every time I walk into an event and I am the only person of colour, it makes me feel different straight away. How can we make sure that people don't feel different? How can they feel like they are part of the conversation? And those things we need to keep continually thinking about as politicians, and also in any organisation, to make sure that we're doing things that are open to all, whether it's the way you have access to a building, whether it's the way you present an event in terms of is it accessible to people who have special needs, or whether you are able to cater for different types of food. All of these things make people feel included and feel as if they are part of whatever you're doing. And as a Liberal, there's no surprise that the Make Votes Matter campaign is so important to me. It's part of our DNA to make sure that every voice matters and every vote matters. And so being part of this campaign has been something that I've been involved with from the very start. It does really feed into diversity issues as well, because we know that there is a tendency for ethnic minorities to be less likely to vote, purely because they just don't feel as if anything will change if they do. And if they don't feel like there's going to be a change, they won't vote. If you say that your vote will matter and that your vote counts, it will make a massive difference. There's so much research out there about how ethnic minorities feel about politicians and elections, and there's real disillusionment and there's real detachment from it, just because literally sometimes they watch the telly, put on the news, and they don't see anybody who looks like them or talks like them or can even relate to them. So that's a real issue. It is about representation as well as our political system having to change. And I will end on one final point. It's how we behave. If we are going to be reaching out and making sure that these voices are heard, we've got to start campaigning in a slightly different way to reach out to diverse communities. It's about listening, it's about engaging and being really actively listening and engaging, and not just when there's an election going on, but to be doing it continually and all the time with genuineness, coming from a place where you actually want to make changes for these people because they're getting sick of it, really. I've been to local mosques recently. I went to one in Lewisham. And somebody said to me, well, I was a member of the Liberal Democrat Party, but I'm not now because, all politicians say the same thing. Nothing ever changes. That's a real problem, isn't it? When people are saying that to you, they're so disengaged because they've just been disappointed. We need to be able to make them feel valued and heard and actually make the changes that we need to make them feel like politics does make a difference, and that when they vote, they will make that difference. And, don't be scared to get cross and angry and show your passion and say how you really feel when you talk to them. Because if anything, we need to be genuine. We need to be able to speak from our heart. We need to be able to tell them why we do the things that we do. And when I speak to people, I talk about myself, I talk about my children, I talk about the future that I want for them. And I speak to them, from my heart. So I would say go out there, speak to them, get your street stalls out near places of worship, time it in a way that works, that you'll definitely be able to connect with people, like on a Friday for in a mosque when they finish prayers, or after a festival or an event, and then reach out to the people who are leading those places of worship and say, can I come and have a chat with you? Please let me listen to your needs, and genuinely be there out there for them, listen, engage, make the difference. And as my father always said, it's not what you do in your lifetime that matters. It's what you do for the future generations that really matters. Keep on thinking about what's next for the next generation, and then we'll be on our right steps for making the real changes that we need to do.
Thank you very much. That was great to hear your perspective on that. I now hand over to Lord Paul Tyler to introduce himself, give his perspective of democracy and diversity, and also to speak about all the important work he's been doing within Liberal Democrats and with other parties and organizations to promote the.
Thank you, Catherine. That was so powerful. I feel like saying, well, look, I agree with everything there. Why don't we go straight to the questions? Because I suspect everybody else is going to be impressed with that personal commitment, which I think is hugely important in this context. But I suppose I'd better do a little bit more than that. That would be a bit lazy, wouldn't it? So the whole issue of inclusion seems to me to be absolutely central to what the Liberal Democrats should be saying in all communities now. It applies to all age groups, it applies to all ethnic groups, it applies to everybody in whatever walk of life they are. And the absolutely critical issue, I think, for us, one that has always been in the center of my activities in this field, is that every citizen in this country is, in my view, equal, and therefore they should have an equal voice. And it's extremely important to make sure that relatively new citizens, whether they're young and just coming onto their electoral register or trying to get onto the electoral register, because there's another issue to be faced there, or whether they've arrived in this country for at other times and are therefore now citizens, that all of them should not feel the disenchantment, the disillusion that he has been referring to. I have a text. My text is making sure that every vote counts. The cornerstone of democracy is extremely important. That latter bit I'm just adding. And later on, I'm sure somebody on this call will be able to tell me where I've taken that text from, because that is the absolute basis of a representative democracy. If citizens are excluded from that process or exclude themselves from that process, then it weakens us. It weakens us all. Our democracy is not working properly. And of course, that's been an interesting experience in New Zealand. My friends in New Zealand tell me that the change in the electoral system in New Zealand was seen as a new gateway for the Maori communities to feel that they were being heard, their voice was being properly listened to. Until that happened, that wasn't there. But I have to tell you, and I'm afraid there'll be other people on this call that'll be able to confirm this, that MPs on the whole don't vote for their own extinction. If it wasn't for the fact we're not going to get any turkeys for this Christmas anyway because of Brexit, I'd say it's the old thing about turkeys not voting for Christmas. But we, therefore, I believe, are in a very interesting situation just at the moment as far as the electoral system is concerned. We've got to find ways of making the thin end of the wedge more effective. Every time a reactionary Tory has told me during my lifetime, oh, if you did that, it'd be the thin end of the wedge, I have privately said to myself, excellent, because I think in this country, whether it's for good or for bad, on the whole, we do move with thin edges of wedges being pushed firmly in there to make a change. And so I just very briefly want to touch on some of the things that have been happening recently, relatively recently, which move us in this direction. The first, of course, is rather older, which is that the Scottish coalition government, the Lib Lab coalition government, introduced the single transferable road for Scotland. And the result immediately was that more people were having the satisfaction of making sure that their vote mattered, that their voice was being heard. It moved from the average of 45% in local elections, having the satisfaction of knowing that they had some impact over the result. They had some actual result from what they did, to 95% if they were using second preferences and so on. That is now moving in Wales, and therefore it's very important, I think, that we should not get so hung up with what's happening in the House of Commons that we fail to meet that. It's also true, of course, and this has been a reminder regularly this year, that had the 2011 Reform Bill for the House of Lords come through, which I worked on for very many years with both governments, both colours, then by now we'd have a Senate that was more representative, and we would have more women there elected, and we'd have more people of diverse background elected to the House of Lords than probably actually in the House of Commons. So again, by taking on areas of the body politic which are somewhere away from the House of Commons, there would be a better chance of getting better representative at that level. There have been some interesting recent developments, as I'm sure others will know, and that is that in the Labour Party conference, 80% of the membership represented at the Labour Party conference just a week or two ago voted to go for PR in their next manifesto. But they were stopped from getting a majority in the conference as a whole by the extraordinarily out-of-date electoral system they have in the Labour Party conference, because the unions, even if they weren't voting, they had the effect of stopping the membership carrying the day. And as a result, the Labour Party is not committed yet. However, the number of local Labour parties and the number of representatives representing those local parties at the Labour Party conference was dramatic. I'm, as you can possibly see behind me, in the process of digging out material from a rather large bookcase, because after 30 years of working in Parliament in both houses, I am to retire at the end of October. At my own free will, I'm not being kicked out. There's no terrible attempt to evict me. I'm deciding that at the age of 80, it's rather a good moment to ease up, and I don't want to be just a part-timer here. So in those circumstances, I've been looking back at some of the work I've been doing over the years on electoral reform. It goes back quite a long way. But at the center of it, at every stage, has been this principle that Hina's been referring to, that we really must find a way of ensuring that every age group, every community, every part of every community feels that they are represented by the representative democracy system that we've got ourselves to. And frankly, at the moment, first past the post just fails them, and fails them regularly. And it's in that context that I'm horrified that by the latest suggestion, which has just been dumped into a committee looking at a bill in the Commons, the Elections Bill, to go backwards with the election of mayors and of police and crime commissioners to first past the post. At the moment, the present system that's done for London Mayor, amongst others, of a supplementary vote, does ensure that the person elected has the support in one form or another of more than half of those who are voting. That is something, of course, that the Conservative government now finds embarrassing and unfortunate, because it doesn't always mean that a Conservative will get elected, and therefore they're going to try and push that back again. Whether the House of Lords will agree to that is something that we will have to face in a few weeks' time. In the meantime, I just want everybody on this call to see that there is a direct connection between better satisfaction, better involvement and inclusion of everybody in this country in our political system, if, as I say, we do make sure that every vote counts the same, which is the cornerstone of democracy. I suspect there are others on this call who have now recognized that. Quote, it comes from the Conservative Party's manifesto from December 2019, but they seemed absolutely determined not to deliver that.
Thank you very much. And you covered quite a lot of different areas there, so hopefully we can go on to the questions. So I'll hand over to you.
Can't hear you.
Sorry, is my sound not working?
No.
Okay. Ellen, can you
Hello. I can actually hear you, Catherine. I don't know how local the problem is about hearing you. Can people raise an electronic hand if you couldn't hear Catherine? They just can't hear you. So it may be local one, I think. What it sounds like to me.
okay. Ellen, are you okay to pick up some questions for the panel? Maybe I can.
Okay, so let's just check again how many people can hear Catherine. If you can hear Catherine, could you raise your electronic hand if you know where to find that?
Good evening. How are you, everybody?
Good evening.
Yes, while Catherine is still trying to get back, let me just try and help out. Catherine, if you can see me, just send me the program and I can quickly just run through that program as you.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we can go back in that case.
I was just handing over to Helen to pick out some questions from the questions. If you can take that on, Helen, please.
Right, okay, so one of the questions that we had is just, I'm working back a little bit through the questions, and we had one from Deborah Newton-Cook who's asking how to get trade unions to develop policy on.
Point of order, Chair. Point of order, Chair. Can I come in, Chair?
Am I the chair? I don't know. Yeah.
You've got a meeting where you're asking people, you talk about diversity and inclusion, and I put my hand up 45 minutes ago to have my say. When am I going to get the chance to have my say? I've been told the meeting's going to finish at 8 o'clock. There's far too many meetings like this where there's long time for speakers and not enough time for people that are in the audience to speak. I've got something important to say and I'd like to say it.
Since you're on, I think we'd better listen to you now.
Sorry, could I come in there? Could I suggest that David goes first? He did have his hand up quite early. Then we'll go to Deborah and we'll take it from there. So David, why don't you go first and we'll go to Deborah and Juliet and others. I can see there's plenty of people with hands up, so we'll get to everybody in the next half hour or so. David, away you go.
Yeah, thank you very much. Right. Well, in my spare time, because I'm a political junkie, I watch a lot of YouTube videos and debates and all the rest of it. And I watched one the other evening with Peter Hitchens, who I don't agree with on anything, but I did feel a bit of like I was on the same page as him, because he said that the things he says nobody ever listens. And diversity, when I think about diversity, I think about all the various parts of diversity: more women in politics, more black people, more Asian people, more LGBT people. But there's one group that's really seriously underrepresented in politics, and it's getting worse. And that's people like me who consider themselves to be working class. And, you know, I'm a blue collar worker. I don't make any apology for that. I was a blue collar worker, a trade union representative. And I haven't been an inactive member of this party. I've campaigned a lot for this party, but I've never really felt that I truly belong, because the vast majority, it's not a criticism, it's just a fact. The vast majority of the people in this party are middle class people who've been to university and have professional careers. To the extent I've been in meetings where people are talking about what university they've been to, and they turn to me and say, "Which one did you go to, David?" And I didn't go to university, unfortunately. That's just the way things turned out. And it extends to so many areas of life. I mean, Paul made the comment about the Make Votes Matter, which is an interesting point. And there's been some stuff in the chat because I made a comment on that. I tried to work with Make Votes Matter on trade unions. They weren't interested. They put all their efforts into the CLPs because it's another example of middle-class professional people speaking to middle-class professional Labour Party activists. They don't know how to talk to trade unions and trade unions. That's why the vote was lost. And I told them and told them and told them, so I blew in the face. They weren't interested. They weren't interested in using me. And this party has got to get its head around the fact that if it wants to grow, it's got to start having policies and being inclusive to working class people who are the majority of the population of the United Kingdom. I'll stop there.
I just want to say thank you for your comment. Actually, that's an amazingly strong, powerful statement to make, and I don't think you're alone in thinking that. I sometimes have to kind of cower when somebody starts saying what university you went to, because I didn't go to Oxford, didn't go to Cambridge. I actually went to a polytechnic, and so therefore am I not as good as you because of that, for that reason. But I, absolutely agree that we need to make sure that we make everyone feel included. That's what I said at the start, and that means even even to the points that you were. We've got a long way to go, and I think there is a problem just generally though with politics. Most of the people that I know in politics tend to be lawyers, tend to be people who come from that kind of privileged background, have got connections. It's one of the reasons I started the charity called the Patrick Foundation, because we knew that a lot of young people who just weren't getting the access to getting involved in politics just because they couldn't find that door go through. So it's up to us to start being more open, being more inclusive, actually bring on young people from all backgrounds, who may not necessarily be actually that involved with politics or want to be involved with politics, but see the meaning and try and bring them involved with the other aspects of politics, which is community activism, changing people's lives. That would be a way forward. So I really, really appreciate what you said, and particularly on the issue of trade unions. I'm sure that others can contribute there, but it's if you're going to talk down to people, then listen. And I'm sure that's probably how the trade unions felt. They felt like they weren't. Again, they've probably felt that they weren't being listened to because they were a different kind of dynamic or group of people, and if their voices aren't being heard, they're not going to get involved.
Okay, I think Deborah was next, and then I can see Juliet's hand up. So Deborah, do you want to go next?
Yes, I can't see myself. I hope you can see me. What an interesting discussion. I mean, I'm talking to you this evening from Brussels, and I'm a Romford lass, Essex girl. First person in my family on both sides to go to university. And I did it because I had the good luck to go to a grammar school, and I worked my way up, and I won a scholarship to the European Parliament. And I came back to, I was looking for a job. Well, I did a master's. I won a scholarship to a master's to get a master's degree, having gone to Italy and taught English for 2 years. And I changed direction and went into to do European politics. And then on the back of my master's, I got a scholarship with the European Parliament. And then I came back to Romford, and I was looking for a job, and I went for a job interview in London, and at a public affairs firm. And the guy who was interviewing me, I won't mention because he's died this year, but he told me, he looked at my CV and he said he could hear my accent. He could hear I was speaking with a Romford accent, and he said in his posh voice, "Oh, I see you pulled yourself up by your bootstrings from out of the gutter from Romford. Go and get a job in a call centre and come back to see me in a year's time." And I left, and I burst into tears and all the rest of it. And then in the end, I got a job in Brussels, and I was so pleased, because one of the things you get from living abroad is that you do not get discriminated against because of your accent. Right, let's get that one out of my system. Now then, going back to NVM, I've only recently been involved with them, and I had feedback from. I went to a meeting to have feedback about the Labour conference. And to be honest, and I say this with another hat on, which is I spent 10 years as a parliamentary assistant in the European Parliament to our Lib Dem MEPs, so I have got experience of working in a parliamentary situation. And they honestly didn't have a clue about how the technicalities of the Labour conference actually worked. They didn't really realise precisely how the weight of the vote, why indeed there should have been a card vote for any Lib Dem watching. Why on earth should there be a card vote when there was such an overwhelming majority of hands, going up in favour? But of course, not all votes are equal, as we subsequently discovered. So, I'm not to take away from the point that was just made about the fact that, and it's good to hear that the trade unions felt ignored and not listened to because they're working class. I would also put it down to quite a large chunk of inexperience. But like I say, I've only recently got involved with them. I'm trying to set up, or I will be setting up NVM overseas for any other Brits who are on here, not UK based. You can follow me on Twitter at ADNewtonC. And then just linking into PR, I posted in the chat a link about the fact that Lord Tyler mentioned this, about the appropriateness of the New Zealand experience of moving over to proportional representation. And Pro Europe GB is running an event tomorrow morning it's a bit early, it's 9 o'clock in the morning UK time, 9 p.m. New Zealand time. Professor Anthony Geddes will be speaking live from New Zealand tomorrow morning on the Kiwi experience. So thank you for your time. And that's my contribution.
Thanks, Deborah. You were mentioning Twitter feeds. Do you want to post them in the chat? I think that's the best way for people.
Oh, I have. They've already posted,
okay,
so
great.
people are going to have to scroll up. I might post them again because it was right at the beginning. I'll post them again.
Yeah, thanks. Before we take the next question, I wonder if Paul or Hina have any comments on what Deborah has just said, or indeed any other comments that have been made along the way. Paul, do you want to come in first?
Oh, no, thank you, Keith. I want to listen to all the contributions, really, because I think we've got limited time. I think that's a better way of doing it, and then perhaps come back at the end, if I may. Okay.
Hina, are you okay for us to move on to the next question or anything? Okay. Juliet was next. Juliet, away you go.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much, Catherine, for this invite and a few others. And Hina, Councillor Hina, that was a great start. And mine is just to say, really, are we all equal? Are we all included? You know, and just to feel that. And I want to talk about it from an African perspective, Black British, as a matter of fact. And I feel that we know the barriers that are faced in this country right from the start. And Hina has expressed some of those issues in a beautiful way. So just to add on what she was saying, the fact of the matter is there is so much that is known that is meant to happen. And we talk about the vote matters, or, you know, and you go in there and you actually feel excluded. And as a Black person, when you feel excluded, not once, not twice, that's every day, 365 days a year. So my question is, it's not something that is, it's a lived experience for many Black British people, Africans, Caribbean, Windrush, Lib Dem, Muslim. And it's that thinking that, that it is okay. So my question is, how do you change that? And I'm going to talk about some of the solutions that I feel that have been left behind in the past. And I've been trying to, since I came to one of your meetings, I believe, and thank you so much to people like Keith Sharp. I saw some tweets about that and I just followed you a little bit, and I tried to reach out. And some of the solutions, the first thing to think about is tokenism. You feel that anytime a Black person is taken, it's just either to do leaflets, or actually they're not treated equally at all in the very presence, and that is color. I want to talk about color and pigmentation, because I feel it's an uncomfortable subject, but it needs to be talked about. The first time you walk into a room, of course, you're the only person, as Hina said, Councillor Hina said here today, you get to feel uncomfortable. But look at it on the other side. And I was telling someone a few days back, and I was talking about safari for a white person to travel to Africa. It's exactly the opposite. The people on the other side, they're quite welcoming. They're quite warm. They want to understand where your country is. You've got a sense of belonging from the time you walk into a safari. So I want to use that as a great example of sense of belonging in a society that you actually grew up, that you actually was born into, that these children or anybody that is got British citizenship, African, or any migrant who is actually running away from refugee or asylum seeker or whatever, but it's a sense of belonging that lacks. So I want to talk about the sense of belonging that should be nurtured within any society, within any political ground, within any inclusion, within any perspective that is of love. Love is the essence of being. Love is the essence of understanding a society in a manner that it's important to understand and generate the kind of conversation, and good conversation, responsible conversations, not having microaggression in a party that is supposed to be liberal. And you find that a group of people, you've had somebody there speak about, oh, you're talking about, oh, what university did you go to? It's nothing wrong with what university you went to. What is wrong about and not understanding that the people who have also gone to university within the same society or within the same stratification that is you tend to think that, oh, if you went to Oxford University, you're better off than someone who is gone to a local university. It is that idea that you begin to question. And yes, there's good university, there might be poor university, but it's the essence of being. It's the essence of that kind of generalization that you might think that perhaps, you'll hear some people even think Black people are less intelligent or African people are less intelligent. And that's quite sensitive in a way. And I'm quite open to discussion. I was talking to somebody else a few months ago. And in fact, it struck me when they said a statement like, everybody is racist. And I thought to myself, that is the white privilege. You say everybody is racist. And perhaps what they meant to say is the unconscious biasness of how people actually think whatever human behavior. But that statement in itself means that we're not being responsible for our own behaviors and how we push democracy. Lived experiences for Africans, Black people, has been from a slavery mentality. And it is important that we remember the idea of how lived experiences even here in UK. If you look at the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, you had places in the street, and I'll leave it there, where it said, no dogs here, no Black people here, no Irish people here. That's the reality. It's not being thought through. That's what people found. That's what those children that grew can see. That's what met them in their eyes. It's nothing else. It's not thinking, it's what happened. And when that lived experience is not able to be lived or actually discussed, it begs a question of actually, are we really thinking about today? Are we thinking about the youth today? Many a times I hear people say, they're youth for tomorrow. You're the youth for tomorrow? No, the youth for today. So I'll leave it there. And I will say, I'm really I'm excited that I'm seeing this kind of conversations. It's a high time we had great conversations, open conversation, as Councillor Hina said. And I just want to thank that. I look forward to the day that you'll see real democracy, real decision makers made out of different color. I started off saying by different colors. You need a room full of different personalities, different, you name it, different sort of jobs, different kind of people. And that is what really nurtures love, nurtures different thinking, nurtures a lot of inspirational in terms of transformational coaching, in terms of allowing people to really choose the right leaders. That's what we need within the Lib Dems. Thank you. And I'm just enjoyed this kind of conversation. I like to be open and bring a conversation that is open and in the room. So also representing Black Lib Dems as well here today, but not really, but I'll put the policy document here. The Black policy document captures some of the issues that the very people who are in the Lib Dems have actually presented in the Lib Dem in itself. And so far, it's like a struggle.
Juliet, sorry to interrupt. By all means, put your document in the chat. There's 3 or 4 other people want to come in the next 10 minutes or so. So if that's okay, we'll move.
I'll submit, yeah.
Okay. You're not submit. You never submit, but if you can just post your document in the chat, we'll be in business. Helen, you had a couple of people next lined up.
Yes, I would like to go to Steve Card, who had a question at the very beginning, and it's about how we recognise what we can do to be more diverse, particularly in rural communities and so on. Can I ask Steve to come in and ask his question, maybe?
Oh, hi, yeah. Yes, thank you for going back to the stuff in the chat. Yeah, I listened with great interest to all of these comments. I have no sense of whether the folk gathered here are from largely towns or cities, but I live in a very rural area, in Suffolk, and as I believe it, Suffolk has a very low non-white population, and I'm sure that there are some concentrations which I take to be mostly in the towns. So I just wanted to really know, is there a methodology so that local parties can find out just how we're measuring up in terms of our own local party diversity to the makeup of our local communities? like I said, I just done a Google search, and there are no mosques showing on Google, as a for instance, within our local party area. So you know, how do we measure up? Where do we find this information? How do we assess ourselves against our communities, our wider communities?
Thank you so much for that question. I thought I'd just come in at that point. I think just because your area doesn't have a mosque doesn't mean that there aren't any Muslims there, for one, but that there is always ways of communicating to Muslim groups in other ways other than mosques. There are many business owners who may live in your area who may come from a Muslim background. But saying that, I think the most important step is to do what you're doing, which is just to work out what is the mix of your community. And the first step is to just purely represent those mixtures within your community, and to making sure that you are representing those voices. There will be groups, there will be activists out there who are doing work for particular campaigns and charities who will all want to be heard. And I would always go that kind of direction first, is making sure you are just at least matching up at first what your community is, and represent those voices first. It will be far more challenging in a rural area to get somebody from an ethnic minority or someone from a minority group getting represented. If you haven't even reached out to those other groups out there first. So start working on the other groups first, and then you'll feel that those smaller groups will come to you, because they'll see that you are reaching out, you're trying to do your best, you're trying to be that conduit to make sure that their voices are being heard.
Thanks.
Helen, I think, I know Marisha's been waiting to come in. Helen, I think you had another questioner to call on. Okay, Marisha, why don't you go next? And hopefully we'll have time to get one or two others in. Marisha, over to my former ex-council colleague on Islington Council. Where you go, Marisha?
Keith, please feel free to chip in, because I was going to speak about exactly that. Keith and I were part of the same council group of 38 councillors. It was the most diverse council group in the country. And I experienced the best inclusion I've ever experienced in my whole life as part of that council group. And I'm not sure that the people who were white realised that they were experiencing the best inclusion that ever occurred. And not just in the Liberal Democrats, but in my entire life. I think that one thing was that at the group meetings, we took the time to understand what a person was saying, and you were permitted to come back and contribute to the debate more than once. So everyone was permitted to listen to people, to change their views on the basis of what they had heard, and to return and say, actually, having listened to these three remarks, bearing in mind there were 38 people there, I would like to change my view, and I now think differently because I've heard this, this, and this. And that meant that everyone was focusing on what was actually being said, the substantive points, and was dynamically actually changing their view. And there is a certain cognitive style that was adopted by that council group. And I would like Liberal Democrats who are white to adopt that amongst themselves in advance of getting any diversity, because it means that when the diversity arrives, it's possible to function and include. So this is a pre-diversity inclusion training. So the next thing I wanted to speak about, and Keith, if you don't mind my speaking about you personally and your job, I know that Hina does. If I can treat you just like I treat Hina. And
well, Marisha, it depends what you're going to say, but carry on.
Keith has worked very closely with colleagues in India because of his professional life. And Keith knows that in general, people in India tend to reach out. They tend to contact people. And it's also considered rude if you don't contact people and find out how they are. There's quite a lot of transmissible disease in India, like here. And we don't assume that everyone is alive and well if we didn't contact them. Therefore, the characteristic of not reaching out, I know, is found strange in both the African diaspora and the South Asian diaspora. And I think to some extent, I'm familiar with the Korean diaspora. Also, there's a bit of reaching out there. So the idea that you must get in touch with people and ask an open question like, how are you? And that is part of politeness. That kind of comes before getting them to engage on electoral reform or any other matter. And then I'd like to just recap Juliet's point. Too often we feel that people have behaved as though
Marisha, I'm going to cut in here. If you could be quick, because we're really out of time. One or two other questioners want to come in.
Okay.
And I would like Hina and Paul the opportunity to, sum up.
Sure. So there's the issue of taking every opportunity to engage with people from a different culture. Now, Liberal Democrats do that. But there's the issue of encouraging everybody else to do that, so that if you go on holiday, that it becomes normal that you actually engage with people and that you actually speak with them about the electoral system, and that Liberal Democrats for Electoral Reform actually ask people before the holiday season, could you please find out what electoral system is used where you're going on holiday? And I'm talking about the public. So I'd very much like to see a series of a dialogue with the public about what electoral system was going on where you went on holiday. Did you find out from local people? Because the issue is that there's a lack of dialogue between people in Britain and people outside Britain on substantive and important matters. And that doesn't happen in other countries. When I go to Spain, I talk with the local government finance director about local government finance, and I have substantive conversations in mixed English and Spanish. And I'd like to see other people doing that. I don't treat it like it doesn't matter what they do in Spain. It does matter what they do in Spain. And we work out what's better in the UK and what's better in Spain. And that, I think, was all I had to say.
Thank you, Marisha.
That was helpful.
Thanks as always. You and I could discuss the Diversity of the Islington Council group going back 10 years or so, which, just to answer a point that was raised in the chat. Helen, I think David Brandwood had a comment or a question, then we probably need to wrap up. Is David there?
Yes. Yeah, your hand has been going up a lot, so to you.
Where you go, David. Go off mute, please.
Yes, thank you. No, I don't have a specific question. I just I'm just interested to listen in. The only thing I would say is that I am standing for the Electoral Reform Council, just as if anybody's interested, and if they agree, if they belong and they agree with what I write, then I'd be grateful for support. But I don't have a particular question. I suppose I would just like to make clear to people who think that Liberal Democrats want electoral reform for some sort of unfair advantage. It's not unfair at all. It's fair advantage. It's a fair dealing, and I personally am very strongly in favour of SDV, partly because it involves multi-member constituencies. And if you have multi-member constituencies, you're a lot more free to vote for people that you want even within a party. For example, women can vote for women, or of course for an ethnic group or whatever. So, so I think that SDV, we should push the point that SDV is good for more diversity or more options for people to vote in a diverse sort of way. That's the only thing I would say. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, David. I mean, as far as the Liberal Democrats are concerned, STV is, of course, party policy, as well as being signed up to the Make Votes Matter Good Systems Agreement as a way of hopefully getting consensus and agreement on that going forward.
Yes.
Catherine, I guess we're running out of time, so we have to finish in a few minutes. So what I think we should, I hope we've taken most people's questions at least. And could I now just return to Paul and to Hina for some closing remarks? And a lot of questions will come up in chat about the labour trade unions. I'm not sure how many of us are qualified to speak about that, but everybody thought that that'd be great. Otherwise, I look forward to the closing comments from Paul, perhaps Paul first and then Hina to finish. Paul, do you want to come in?
Thank you very much, Keith. First, can we just be absolutely clear? In this next winter, there are going to be a large number of people in precisely the sort of groups that people have been referring to now, who will feel desperately that they're not being listened to. It's going to be a very tough winter. And I think we're going to have a special responsibility in the Liberal Democrats to be listening to those people and to try and make sure that we're acting as their voices. Because otherwise, the sort of people that Juliet was referring to, Marisha was referring to, are going to be the ones that I think are going to be most affected by some disastrous Brexit and COVID results. And the combination of the two is going to be very damaging to the whole way in which our society operates and the extent to which it holds together. So in those circumstances, I think what we were hearing just now about listening to people and making sure that we are really are able to represent that diversity is going to be extremely important. Keith, you referred just now to where is the Labour Party, and perhaps I just say a word about that because I see Robert in the chat is also asking, should we be doing something special with the Labour Party? My advice to all our colleagues has been that while the Labour Party internally was coming to a decision or trying to come to a decision at a local level, it wasn't helpful for us to be too critical or, for that matter, to be too enthusiastic about PR. Because if we did, it would be suspected that we had a special interest in this, and it wasn't really the Labour Party's interest, it was another party's interest to be pushing it. But in my view, unless the Labour Party commits itself to PR at the next general election, the extent of tactical voting will be such that they will not have a chance of forming a government. They're not going to form a government on their own anyway, with the way in which the electorate has changed in recent years. But they have a chance of forming a government if there is tactical voting. That tactical vote will depend, to my mind, on the extent to which people feel they really are progressive and not regressive still on this very important issue. So the extent to which we cooperate is, I think, a matter for individual electors, not for the parties themselves. I don't think there's any chance of there being any sort of pacts at a local level with the Labour Party, not least because they are still so tribal on these issues. And that would be my answer to, I think it was just Robert, but there are others in the chat who are expressing opinion on that. But in the meantime, we have got a job to do. I hope that's what's come through from what everybody's saying this evening. We've got to get away from the idea that if somebody is in a different category, a different group, a different community than ourselves, they're not worth listening to. That Labour Party is in that category now, and I think we've got to avoid their trap. We've got to be much better at talking across the boundaries, making sure we don't get stuck in silos. We're not prepared to listen to other people with other views that are similar to ourselves, but not precisely alongside. If you're wondering what the bell is, it is, I'm afraid, that I've got to vote. So I'm going to have to leave you to do that. Although I'm allowed to do it from my desk, obviously I've got to make sure that I'm voting in the right way on the right issue. That's what democracy is all about. But may I thank you all for the contributions you've made, which have been extremely useful to me and I'm sure have been to others on this call. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you.
And a quick plug, we look forward to welcoming Paul at our AGM, LDR AGM on November the 2nd. and to thank him for all of the work that he's done and the leadership he's given over many years. We probably have to wind up now. So final word, Hina, if you would like to say a few final words before we finish.
Yes, thank you so much. What an honour to have joined this discussion, particularly hearing the wise words from Paul just now. I just want to kind of end on the fact that many of the reasons that Black and ethnic minorities don't vote is actually for the same reasons why white people don't vote as well, and those reasons are simply because my vote will not make a difference. That's the thing that we need to kind of get across, that if we can change this political system, we can change the demographics and how politics looks, how politics behaves. A lot of young people say to me, we don't get the policies, we don't get the kind of discussions in politics that actually resonate with us, and part of the reason is that politicians know, and particularly the Conservative Party, know that all they really need to do is to reflect the opinions of people who vote for them. And they tend to be people from an older generation who don't tend to be ethnic minorities. Therefore, the policies will never relate or resonate with the people who are from those diverse communities. We must change the system to make sure that it does truly reflect the people that we represent, and that the only way forward is proportional representation. And if we keep on making that message clear to everyone that we speak to at the doors, when we're out and about, when we're in the places of worship, when we're in anything at all, when we're actively working with our communities, get out there and say, if you want your voice to matter, we've all got to really push for proportional representation, because then your voices will matter, and that will make all the difference.
Well, thank you, Hina, and thank you, everyone. I mean, look, there are so many issues that have come up tonight, and I've been kind of trying to keep up with the chat as we've gone through. Clearly, we've only really scratched the surface of a lot of this, but I do know that Catherine and other colleagues on the LDR executive don't see this as a one-off. We do see, looking at how we vote and how we behave in society and the equality and the representation, the diversity and the inclusion that we've touched on tonight, is something we want to spend some more time on as we go forward. Being able to link a change to the voting system to the way in which we live our lives and our ability to participate in society is absolutely key. And so if we didn't address everything you were hoping we'd address tonight, please see this as episode 1 of a whole mini series that we will be running. But I think at that we have to conclude this evening. So could I just thank Catherine, who's put herself on mute at this stage, I see. Could I just thank Catherine for really, and one or two other colleagues, but Catherine's here tonight, for initiating all of this. Thank you all for participating. Another quick plug for our AGM on November the 2nd, where Paul will be speaking along with Wendy Chamberlain, who's the LDR president. But in the meantime, thank you all very much for joining us this evening. It's been very stimulating for me personally, and I'm sure for many of us. We've got a recording of this, and we will hope to share it with people as we go forward. Thank you all very much, and good night.